There's a moment in your faith journey where everything feels still not in a peaceful way, but in a way that makes you question if God is even listening anymore. The prayers don't seem to echo back. The breakthroughs don't come when you expect them. People around you seem to be moving forward, getting answers, living in the light of what they've been waiting for. And you're just still. You're trying to stay faithful, trying to believe, but it's getting harder to ignore the silence. That silence starts to feel personal, almost like rejection. Like maybe God has turned away from you. Maybe he's done with you. Maybe he's moved on. But I need you to hear this. Silence is not the same as absence. And God's quiet isn't proof of rejection, it's preparation. You see, in the noise of our world, we've come to expect constant affirmation, constant updates, immediate clarity. But God doesn't operate on human timelines. He doesn't owe us explanations in the way we've been trained to expect. When God goes quiet, it's not to hurt you. It's to form something deeper in you. Because sometimes the silence isn't punishment, it's protection. Sometimes God has to pull you into a sacred stillness because he knows that what he's building in you needs space to grow. Don't think about it. The seed doesn't grow on the surface. It grows in the dark, hidden underground where no one sees it. No applause, no validation, no likes or recognition. And yet, in that hiddenness, something sacred is forming. Roots are stretching deep, foundations are being built. And when the time is right, it will break through the surface, not because the world was watching, but because God was working. And that's you right now, in the stillness, in the hiddenness, in the space where you feel overlooked. But God hasn't forgotten you. He's forming you. What if the silence you're hearing isn't God ignoring you, but God speaking to you differently? What if this season isn't about getting more answers, but about developing more trust? We like to think faith is all about movement, stepping forward, climbing mountains, walking through doors. But real faith is staying still when everything in you wants to run. Real faith is trusting the process when you can't see the promise. Real faith is knowing that even when God says nothing, he's still doing something. And I get it. It's hard. It's hard to sit in the silence. It's hard to be the one who keeps showing up, keeps praying, keeps believing when nothing looks like it's changing. But the silence is part of the story. And if you cut short the silent season, you cut short your own growth. God isn't in a hurry. He sees the full picture. He knows what's ahead. And he knows what you'll need to carry when you get there. So he trains you in the quiet. He stretches you in the hidden place. He prepares you without announcing it to the world. So don't despise this stillness. Don't assume that nothing's happening just because you can't see it. God works behind the scenes long before he reveals his hand in public. Before David ever took the throne, he was tending sheep. Before Esther saved her people, she sat silently in the palace. Before Jesus performed miracles, he spent 30 years hidden in plain sight. Preparation doesn't always look glamorous. In fact, it rarely does. But it's always necessary. And maybe right now, that's exactly where you are, in the place between the promise and the fulfillment. In the space where your prayers seem to fall flat, your heart feels heavy, and your faith is stretched thin. But hear me, this isn't where the story ends. It's where the roots are going deeper. It's where your spirit is being fortified. It's where your dependence on God becomes real, not because of what he's giving you, but because of who he is. Even when he's quiet, the silence isn't the end, it's the middle. And the middle is always messy. It's full of doubt, stretching, refining, but it's also full of potential, because the middle is where you learn that your faith isn't built on feelings. It's built on trust. It's where you learn that you don't need to see God to know he's near. You just need to believe that his word is still true, even when The world feels loud and heaven feels quiet. God hasn't forgotten you. You are not being punished. You're being positioned. You're not being cast aside. You're being called deeper into intimacy, into maturity, into strength that doesn't shake when circumstances do. You're not just being prepared for the promise. You're being shaped to carry it with grace, integrity, and wisdom. So don't fear the silence. Embrace it. Because it's in the silence that you'll discover the loudest truths. He's not gone. He's not late. He's right there. And he's working, even in the quiet, even in the stillness. Even when you can't feel it, the silence is sacred. And you're right where you need to be. You know, sometimes we forget that God's protection doesn't always come wrapped in the packages we expect. We think protection means shielding us from danger, from harm, from loss. And yes, sometimes it does. But often, God's protection shows up as removal, as endings, as distance, as people walking out of your life, as doors shutting that you were convinced were meant to stay open. And in that moment, it feels like rejection, like betrayal, like confusion. But later, with time, with prayer, with healing, you begin to see it for what it truly was. Divine protection. It's hard to understand why someone who once felt like family can suddenly become a stranger. Why a friendship that was once so full of laughter becomes a source of pain. Why someone who claimed to love you chooses silence, distance, or worse, turns against you. And your first instinct is often to question yourself. What did I do wrong? Could I have done something differently? Was I not enough? But those questions lead to spirals, not clarity. Because sometimes it's not about what you did wrong. Sometimes it's about what God did right by taking them out of your life before they could damage your spirit any further. There are people who are not meant to go where God is taking you. And that's not a punishment to them or an insult to you. It's just purpose. It's protection. Because God sees conversations you didn't hear. He sees motives you didn't detect. He sees futures you can't yet imagine. And when he removes someone, it's not random. It's strategic. It's precise. It's surgical. He's not subtracting love from your life. He's removing a weight you didn't even know you were carrying. We have this tendency to cling, don't we? We hold on to relationships because of shared memories, shared years, shared experiences. But longevity is not the same as loyalty. And not everyone who walked with you through your past is qualified to walk with you into your destiny. Some people are only equipped for the version of you they met. But as you grow, as you heal, as you evolve, those same people begin to feel uncomfortable. Not because you've done something wrong, but because your growth confronts their comfort. And that's when you start seeing distance, tension, misunderstandings that don't make sense. That's not always an attack. Sometimes it's alignment. God will disturb your connections to preserve your calling. Let me say that again. God will disturb your connections to preserve your calling. You might lose the people, but you won't lose your purpose. In fact, the loss may be the very thing that activates your purpose. Because when you're no longer wrapped up in trying to fix or please the wrong people, you're finally free to hear what God's been whispering all along. You were made for more. You were made for freedom. You were made for peace. So don't mourn what God has removed as if he made a mistake. Trust that he's doing what a good father does, guarding your future, protecting your heart, and positioning you for something greater. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it can feel unfair. But the very thing that broke your heart might be the thing that saved your life. That person you were crying over, they might have been blocking the very blessing you've been praying for. That opportunity you thought you missed. It might have been a detour from your destiny. Sometimes what feels like a setback is actually God clearing the runway. He's getting the debris out of the way. The relationships that would have sabotaged your next season. the distractions that would have drained your energy, the people who smile in your face but secretly resent your growth. God sees all of that, and He loves you too much to let you stay entangled in what was only meant to be temporary. And if you're honest with yourself, you felt it, didn't you? That small uneasiness, that gut feeling that something wasn't quite right, that prayer where you said, God, if they're not meant for me, remove them. But when the removal came, it still shook you, and that's okay. It's human too. Feel the sting, but it's spiritual to trust the pruning, because every time God cuts something off, He's making room for something better to grow. You don't have to chase closure with people God has already removed. Let them go with grace. Not bitterness, not revenge, not desperate explanations, just grace. Because God saw what you couldn't, and His love for you includes protecting you from people who cannot steward your heart well. This season might be quieter, your circle might be smaller, but your peace will be louder, your clarity will be sharper, and your spirit will be lighter because you're no longer carrying dead weight. You're walking in freedom. Their absence is not your loss. It's your protection. Sometimes the reason God removes certain people from your life is because their presence was stunting your growth. Not in an obvious way, not always in a toxic or harmful way. In fact, some of them were good people, kind people. People who once uplifted you, supported you, walked with you through some of the hardest seasons of your life. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. Just because someone was right for a past version of you doesn't mean they're right for the person you're becoming. Growth is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, internal, spiritual, a shift that starts in your soul before it ever reaches your circumstances. You begin to think differently, see differently, speak differently. And as that transformation begins, God starts to reveal who's aligned with your future and who's only compatible with your past. And that revelation, it's uncomfortable. Because now you're faced with a decision. Do you shrink yourself to keep the peace, or do you honor the new person God is shaping you into? Some people get uncomfortable when you start healing, when you stop gossiping, when you start setting boundaries, when you no longer engage in the drama they've come to expect. They'll say you've changed like it's a bad thing. And you have. That's the point. Healing changed you. Truth changed you. God changed you. But not everyone claps for that change. Some distance themselves. Others criticize it. And suddenly, you find yourself questioning your own growth just to stay connected. That's where the test lies. Because spiritual growth comes with spiritual friction. As you grow closer to God, certain relationships will naturally fall away, not because you're better than them, but because your priorities no longer align. You're focused on peace and they're addicted to chaos. You're learning to forgive, and they want to keep score. You're leaning into grace, and they're still operating out of bitterness. And no matter how much you try to drag them into your new season, they can't breathe, and the altitude God is calling you to. Growth exposes what can't go with you. It exposes the conversations that no longer serve your soul, the habits that weigh you down, the connections that drain more than they pour. And when you start choosing silence over reaction, prayer over gossip, accountability over blame, it changes your atmosphere. Not everyone can survive in that atmosphere. And that's not your fault. It's not your job to shrink just to make others comfortable. It's not your job to dim your light so others don't feel insecure. You don't have to apologize for evolving. You don't have to explain why you're no longer the same. If someone requires the unhealed version of you to stay connected, that's not love, that's dependence. And God will allow distance to protect the healing He's doing in you. You see, healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming better. And becoming better means letting go of what no longer fits. That might be the friend who only calls to complain, the relationship that thrives on guilt, the group that laughs when you doubt yourself but goes quiet. When you speak with confidence, God sees how those patterns affect you. He sees how your spirit contracts in those environments. And in His mercy, He steps in not to punish them, but to protect you. We often pray for growth, for elevation, for clarity, but we rarely expect the price. And sometimes the price is separation, not forever, not always, but enough time for you to find your voice again, to hear God again, to believe in yourself again without the noise of doubt echoing through your relationships. And if you're honest, you've outgrown some spaces, not out of pride, but out of peace. You can't laugh at the same jokes, entertain the same distractions, or tolerate the same disrespect. What used to be entertaining now feels exhausting. What used to feel like home now feels heavy. That's not a mistake. That's growth. And when that growth begins to conflict with your surroundings, God will shift your environment. Not out of cruelty, but out of care. Because He knows if you stay in certain atmospheres too long, they'll pull you back into patterns He's trying to deliver you from. So yes, some exits are painful. Some goodbyes feel like grief. But they're also signs, markers of a God who cares more about your future than your comfort zone. So if someone's absence left you confused, ask yourself this: who was I becoming when they left? What patterns was I breaking? What prayers was I praying? Sometimes their exit isn't about you being rejected, it's about you being refined. Their departure created the space for you to expand. Their silence made room for God's voice to grow louder. Their withdrawal wasn't a curse, it was a course correction. The truth is, you were never meant to stay stagnant. And neither were your relationships. Some were for a season. Others are for a reason. And very few are for a lifetime. Don't confuse the length of a relationship with the depth of its purpose. God knows when to prune, and He never cuts without a plan. So no, you're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not too spiritual. You're just growing. And growing people often walk alone before they walk in alignment. Let the distance do its work. Let the silence become sacred. Let the transformation complete itself. And trust that what God removes, He replaces with something greater, something healthier, something that matches who you're becoming. Because your growth is not a burden, it's a sign that you're finally walking in your purpose. And then there are those moments when you look around and realize you're the only one still standing. The friends are gone. The invitations have stopped. The conversations that once kept you going now feel forced or non-existent. It's a quiet season, a still season. And everything in you wants to ask God, why does it feel like I'm alone? But here's the thing we often miss in that silence. Protection doesn't always look like angel wings or open doors. Sometimes it looks like subtraction, like people walking away, like unanswered calls. Like connections fading without warning. It feels personal. It feels like rejection, but what if it's really redirection? What if God isn't punishing you, He's positioning you? What if their absence is actually the answer to a prayer you forgot you prayed? You asked for peace, didn't you? You asked for clarity, for growth, for strength, for purpose. And God, in His mercy, began to move things around. Not to hurt you, but to heal you, to separate you from the noise so you could finally hear His voice again. Some of the people you lost weren't meant to make it to the next level of your life. Not because they were bad, but because your spirit started to outgrow the spaces they were comfortable in. The way you think now, the way you speak, the way you move. It's not out of arrogance, it's out of alignment. God is aligning your life with your calling, and that alignment requires accuracy. Not everyone can walk with you in that. You see, some people were only assigned to your comfort zone. They loved you as long as you stayed the same, as long as you played small, as long as you didn't confront the things that needed to change. But the moment you started healing, the moment you started setting boundaries, the moment you decided to choose peace over performance, they pulled back. They didn't clap for your courage. They whispered about your confidence. They questioned your convictions. And suddenly you were labeled as too much, too distant, too spiritual. But maybe that space they left behind wasn't empty. It was sacred. It was God creating room. Because sometimes he has to clear the room before he brings in the right people, the right voices, the right circle. People who don't just tolerate your growth, but nourish it. People who don't fear your light, but help you shine brighter. People who don't question your healing, but honor your process. Those kinds of people are rare. And sometimes you won't find them until you're willing to sit in the silence that their absence creates. So instead of rushing to fill that silence with distractions or replacements, what if you sat with it? What if you allowed it to teach you something about yourself, about God, about where you're headed? Because silence isn't always a void. Sometimes it's a vessel, a container for clarity. And in that clarity, you'll begin to see some of those relationships were keeping you stuck. Their voices were louder than your own. Their opinions drowned out your convictions. And God, in his love, pressed mute. Yes, it stings. Yes, it's lonely, but it's not without purpose. Isolation is often the birthplace of revelation. Some of the greatest shifts in your life will happen when no one is watching, no one is cheering, no one is texting. You got this. It's just you and God. And in that sacred space, he begins to rebuild you, not the version of you that fit in, the version of you that was built to lead, to carry, to speak, to rise. That kind of transformation requires pruning. And pruning never feels good in the moment, but it's always for your good in the long run. Because what God is growing in you needs protection, needs space, needs quiet. So when he removes someone, don't always rush to replace them. Sometimes the vacancy is part of the victory. You don't need to run back to what's familiar just because it's familiar. You don't need to explain to anyone why you've changed. You don't need closure from people who were never committed to your wholeness in the first place. You just need trust. Trust that God sees the full picture. Trust that he doesn't waste pain. Trust that the same God who removed them is the same God who is healing you, strengthening you, preparing you for something bigger, something deeper, something more aligned with who you truly are.